The desert air was still cold when Sergeant Danny Reeves stepped out of the makeshift barracks, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Dawn painted the sky in pale oranges and purples, stretching endlessly over the barren Afghan landscape. The outpost was quiet, too quiet, except for the hum of the generator and the occasional shuffle of boots on gravel. Danny adjusted his rifle strap and took a slow sip from his canteen. His squad was already assembling near the gate, their breath visible in the crisp morning air. Corporal Jake Harlow stood apart from the others, shoulders tense, his usual easy grin absent. "Morning, sunshine," Danny called, clapping Harlow on the back. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Harlow didn't smile. "Might have, Sarge." He jerked his chin toward the perimeter. "Take a look for yourself." Danny followed his gaze. Just beyond the wire, the soft sand bore a trail of footprints, fresh ones, leading away from the outpost. His gut tightened. No one had left the compound overnight. No patrols, no locals, nothing. He crouched, brushing a gloved finger along the edge of a print. The shape was human, mostly, but the stride was too long, the toes slightly elongated, as if whatever made them had stretched unnaturally with each step. "Wind could have messed him up," Private Martinez offered, shifting his weight. "Or some asshole's messing with us." Harlow shook his head. "Wind doesn't make tracks toward the desert and then vanish. And who the hell would be out here screwing with us? We're in the middle of nowhere." Danny stood, dusting sand from his knees. "Radio command. See if they've got any reports of movement in the area." Martinez nodded and jogged toward the comms tent. The rest of the squad lingered, uneasy. The desert stretched silent around them, the rising sun casting long, jagged shadows. Harlow exhaled sharply. "You ever hear those stories, Sarge? The ones the locals tell? About things out here that aren't supposed to be?" Danny shot him a look. "Save the ghost stories for campfire night, Harlow." But as he stared at those footprints, too deliberate, too wrong, he couldn't shake the creeping sense that something had been watching them. And whatever it wasn't human. The desert heat clung to the air like a tangible thing by the time Doc Ellis crouched beside the new set of footprints. The sun hung high, bleaching the sand where it wasn't marred by the dark, uneven impressions. "Closer this time," Danny muttered, glancing toward the perimeter wire. The tracks stopped just 10 yards out, as if whoever or whatever had made them had paused there, studying the outpost. Doc ran a hand over the closest print, his medic's gloves tracing the edges. "No boot tread," he said, voice low. "No sign of disturbance around them, either. Just these." He rocked back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow, like they appeared out of thin air. Martinez let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, come on. You saying some barefoot ghost walked up to the wire and then poofed away?" "Did you see anyone out here?" Doc shot back, standing. His usual calm demeanor had frayed at the edges, his dark eyes flicking between the prints in the empty desert beyond. Danny exhaled through his nose. The squad had been on edge since dawn, the tension coiling tighter with every hour. Even the usual banter over MREs had been subdued, replaced by sideways glances and two quiet murmurs. Harlow kicked at the sand, sending a small cloud puffing up. Could be a scout. Taliban likes to play mind games. "Without boots," Doc said, "in this heat, you'd leave more than just footprints, broken brush, disturbed rocks. There's nothing." A silence settled over them, heavy and thick. The desert stretched out, vast and indifferent, the horizon shimmering under the relentless sun. Danny rubbed the back of his neck. "Double the watch tonight. Torres, your first shift." Lance Corporal Rick Torres, usually quick with a joke, just nodded, his jaw tight. The wind picked up after dark, howling through the gaps in the outpost walls like something trying to get in. Torres sat perched on an ammo crate, rifle resting across his knees, his eyes scanning the blackness beyond the wire. The floodlights cast jagged shadows, turning every rock into a hunched figure. Then a whisper. Torres stiffened, his grip tightening on his rifle. It wasn't the wind. It was too deliberate, too close. A murmur of syllables, just beyond the edge of hearing. He swung his rifle toward the sound, his breath coming quick. "Who's there?" Nothing. The desert was still. Torres exhaled sharply, forcing himself to relax. Just the wind, just his mind playing tricks. Then it came again, a hiss of words, slipping through the night like a snake through sand. His finger hovered over the trigger. Show yourself. Silence. The floodlights flickered. Torres didn't sleep when his shift ended. None of them did. The squad moved in tight formation, rifles at the ready, eyes flicking between the strange footprints and the endless dunes beyond. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the sand into a blinding sheet of white. Sweat trickled down Danny's neck beneath his gear, but the discomfort was secondary to the gnawing unease in his gut. Harlow walked beside him, his jaw set. "This is a bad idea, Sarge." "We don't leave threats uninvestigated," Danny said, though the words tasted hollow. Martinez snorted from behind them. "Yeah, unless the threat's a damn ghost." "Shut it," Danny snapped. The tracks led them toward a jagged outcropping of rock, half buried in the dunes. As they neared, the prints grew more erratic, longer strides, deeper impressions, as if whatever made them had been running, or dragging something. Danny signaled for the squad to halt. He crouched, examining the ground. The sand here was disturbed, not just by the prints but by something else. Scuff marks, loose stones kicked aside. His eyes traced the pattern toward the rocks. "There's a gap," Harlow murmured, nodding toward a narrow crevice in the outcrop. Barely visible, but just wide enough for a man to slip through. Danny exhaled. Martinez, rook flank left. "Doc, Harlow with me. Stay sharp." They approached the crevice in silence. The air grew cooler as the rocks closed in around them, shadows swallowing the harsh sunlight. The scent of damp earth and something metallic, gunpowder, drifted from the darkness ahead. Then Danny saw it, a shallow cave, hidden behind the rocks. Inside, crates were stacked haphazardly, their lids pried open. Taliban markings, explosives, maps, documents. "Intel jackpot," Martinez muttered, stepping forward. "Hold position," Danny ordered. His skin prickled. The cave was too quiet, too still. The crates hadn't been left here by accident, they'd been placed. Harlow's hand tightened on his rifle. "No one's here." Doc crouched beside one of the crates, flipping through a stack of papers. "These are recent. Supply routes. Names." He looked up, grim. "This isn't just a cache. It's a trap." Danny's radio crackled. Torres's voice, "Tense, Sarge, movement northeast of your position. Fast, can't get a visual." The dread in Danny's gut twisted into something colder. "Fall back, now." The squad moved fast, retracing their steps through the crevice. The sunlight outside was blinding after the cave's gloom. They'd barely cleared the rocks when the first shot rang out, a sharp crack that sent sand spraying near Danny's boots. "Contact," Harlow yelled, dropping to a knee and returning fire. Gunfire erupted from the dunes. Muzzle flashes winked in the distance, but no figures, no silhouettes. Just bullets slicing through the air. "Where the hell are they?" Martinez shouted, spraying suppressing fire. Rook cursed, stumbling as a round grazed his thigh. Blood darkened his pant leg. "I'm hit." Doc lunged for him, dragging him behind cover. "Got you, keep pressure." Danny's pulse hammered in his ears. They were exposed. No enemy in sight, just gunfire from nowhere. Then, laughter. Thin, rasping, carried on the wind like a whisper. It wasn't human, couldn't be. It slithered between the gunshots, taunting. Harlow's face paled. "What the fuck?" A deafening blast cut him off. The ground erupted in a plume of fire and sand. IED. The shock wave knocked Danny off his feet. His ears rang. Smoke choked the air. Through the haze, he saw Rook on the ground, clutching his leg. Doc was shouting, but the sound was muffled, distant. And then silence. The gunfire stopped. The laughter faded. Danny scrambled up, scanning the dunes. Nothing. No bodies. No blood trails. No sign of the ambush except the burning wreckage of the IED and Rook's ragged breathing. Martinez cursed, shaking his head. They were right there. Where'd they go? Danny didn't answer. The desert stretched empty around them, the wind stirring the sand as if wiping away all traces of the fight. But the dread remained. And in the distance, barely audible beneath the wind, something whispered back. The night watches. The outpost felt smaller at night. Shadows pooled in the corners of the barracks, stretching long fingers across the floor. The generator's hum was the only constant sound, a low drone beneath the occasional creak of metal under the wind's weight. Doc Ellis knelt beside Rook's cot, pressing another bandage to the wound on his thigh. The gauze soaked through almost immediately, dark and glistening in the dim light. "Should have clotted by now," Doc muttered, more to himself than to Rook. His fingers trembled slightly as he peeled back the bloody dressing. Rook gritted his teeth, his face slick with sweat. "Feels like it's burning." Danny watched from the doorway, arms crossed. He'd seen worse wounds stop bleeding faster, but this wasn't right. The edges of the gash looked ragged, almost chewed, as if something had gnawed at it after the bullet grazed him. Martinez leaned against the wall, rolling a cigarette between his fingers without lighting it. "Told you. Ghost bullets." "Shut up," Torres snapped. He hadn't left Rook's side since they dragged him back. His usual humor was gone, replaced by a twitchy intensity. His fingers drummed against his thigh, restless. Harlow sat on his cot, sharpening his knife with methodical strokes. The rasp of steel filled the silence. "We should have burned those crates." Danny exhaled. "Command wants them intact. They're sending a team at first light." "A team for what?" Harlow's blade stilled. "There was no one out there, Sarge. No bodies. No blood. Just," he gestured sharply with the knife. Laughter. Doc's head jerked up. "You heard it too?" A beat of silence. Martinez's cigarette crumpled in his grip. "Heard what?" Doc's throat worked. "When I was patching Rook up. After the blast, it was whispering. Right behind me." His gaze flicked to Danny. "You didn't hear it." Danny hadn't. But the way Doc's hands shook now, that was real. Torres stood abruptly, his chair scraping. "I'm not taking watch alone tonight." Danny frowned. "You've got the first shift. Standard rotation." "No." Torres's voice cracked. He swallowed, forcing it lower. "Something's out there, Sarge. It's watching us." Harlow slid his knife back into its sheath. "Jinn." Martinez groaned. "Not this shit again." "The locals talk about them," Harlow pressed, undeterred. "Spirits, demons. They live in the desert. They lure people, and they don't leave tracks." Doc's hands stilled on Rook's leg. "The bleeding won't stop." A chill crept up Danny's spine. He straightened. "Enough. Torres, you're with me on first watch. Martinez, Harlow second. Doc stays with Rook." No one argued. The floodlights cast a sickly yellow glow over the perimeter. Danny stood with his back to the wire, scanning the darkness beyond. The wind carried grains of sand that hissed against his sleeves, his collar. Torres paced nearby, rifle clutched tight. "You think it's just us losing it?" he asked suddenly. "The heat, the isolation." "Maybe," Danny said. But he didn't believe it. A flicker of movement caught his eye just past the wire. A shadow, tall and too thin, standing motionless in the dunes. Danny's breath hitched. He blinked. It was gone. No footprints. No sound. Just empty desert where the figure had been. Torres hadn't noticed. He was still talking, voice tight with nerves, like it's playing with us. The whispers, the goddamn laughing. Danny didn't answer. His skin prickled, the nape of his neck crawling with the weight of being watched. Out in the darkness, something shifted. And this time it didn't disappear when he blinked. The wind began as a whisper, a faint rustle at the edges of the outpost that Danny first mistook for Torres shifting his weight. Then it rose, a low, insistent moan that built into a howl, flinging grit against the prefab walls with the force of buckshot. "Sandstorm," Danny barked into his radio, squinting against the first stinging wave. "All units, batten down." The squad moved fast. Martinez and Harlow hauled the supply shed's doors shut, fighting the wind's grip. Doc dragged Rook inside the barracks as the wounded man muttered incoherently, his feverish eyes rolling toward the darkening sky. Then the perimeter alarms blared, a shrill, electronic shriek that cut through the storm's roar. Danny lunged for the control panel. The sensors lit up in a full red ring around the outpost, triggering in perfect sequence as if something were circling them. But through the thickening haze of sand, there was nothing to see. Torres grabbed his arm, shouting over the wind, "Sarge, Rook's talking, you gotta hear this." Inside the barracks, the air tasted of sweat and diesel. Rook thrashed on his cot, his bandages seeping dark stains into the sheets. His cracked lips moved, spitting words between ragged breaths. "Walker in the sand, long steps, it knows our names." Doc pressed a hand to Rook's forehead and jerked back. "He's burning up. This isn't just infection." A particularly violent gust shook the building, rattling the roof panels like bones in a drum. The wind's howl twisted for one terrible second. It formed syllables. "Danny." Harlow's knife was in his hand before the sound faded. "You heard that." It wasn't a question. Martinez laughed, high and unsteady. "It's the wind, man. Just the fucking wind." But his fingers whitened around his rifle. Danny checked his sidearm. "Seal the vents. No one goes out until this passes." Dawn crept in slow and hesitant, the sandstorm dissipating like a curtain drawn back. The squad emerged, squinting into the muted light, weapons raised. The alarms had stopped. The wind was silent. And the sand around the outpost bore a perfect ring of footprints, each one elongated, toe-less, pressed deep as if their maker had paced endlessly through the storm. Command's response crackled through the radio an hour later, tinny with static. "No hostile activity reported in your sector. Recommend psychological evaluation if stress symptoms persist." Harlow kicked the radio stand, sending it clattering. "They think we're cracking up." Doc crouched beside the nearest print. "These weren't here yesterday." Martinez scuffed his boot through one, erasing it. "So, wind shifts dunes all at once," Danny interrupted. The prints were evenly spaced, unnervingly deliberate, encircling the entire outpost without a single misstep. No human could have walked that precise path blind in a sandstorm. Harlow knelt, sifting sand through his fingers. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than Danny had ever heard it. "My grandfather told stories. Said some deserts are older than people. That they get hungry." He looked up, his eyes shadowed. "He burned sage when things lingered too close." Martinez snorted. "What, like ghost pepper spray?" Harlow didn't rise to the bait. "It's a purification ritual. Smoke drives away evil spirits." Doc rubbed his temples. "We're soldiers, not shamans." A choked sound came from the barracks doorway. Rook stood swaying, one hand clutching his bloody bandage. His pupils were blown wide, his stare fixed on the horizon. "They're not gone," he whispered. "The storm just hid them better." Danny followed his gaze. The desert lay empty under the climbing sun. But the back of his neck prickled, raw and exposed, as if something out there had finally learned how to blink back. Danny Reeves tightened the strap of his rifle, his fingers lingering on the worn grip. The squad stood in a loose circle near the gate, the morning light casting their shadows long and jagged across the sand. The air smelled of dust and gun oil, thick with the unspoken tension that had settled over them like a shroud. "One last sweep," Danny said, his voice firm despite the unease coiling in his gut. "We follow the tracks, document what we find in radio command. No deviations." Harlow exhaled sharply, adjusting his helmet. "And if we find more than just footprints?" "Then we deal with it like Marines," Danny shot back, though the words tasted hollow. The last patrol had left Rook feverish and Doc's hands shaking. Whatever was out there wasn't Taliban. Martinez slapped a fresh magazine into his rifle with a click. "Let's just get this over with before the sun turns us into jerky." The squad moved out in silence, boots crunching over the hard, packed earth. The newest set of footprints fresher than the others, the edges still crisp, led northeast, toward a shallow depression between two dunes. Danny signaled for the squad to slow as they approached, the hair on the back of his neck standing on end. The tracks ended abruptly at the edge of the depression. And there, half buried in the sand, was a body. Doc Ellis was the first to kneel, brushing away the loose grit with careful fingers. The corpse wore tattered desert fatigues, the fabric bleached and brittle from exposure. The skull grinned up at them, the jaw unhinged in a silent scream. "Marine," Doc muttered, lifting a corroded dog tag from the corpse's neck. The metal was pitted, the name illegible. Old, real old. This patrol's been missing for years. Harlow crouched beside him, his knife already in hand. Then what the hell's been walking in his boots? A sharp crack split the air gunfire. Danny barely registered the searing pain in his shoulder before the second shot kicked up sand at his feet. Contact. He roared, diving behind a dune as more rounds peppered the ground around them. This time, the enemy was visible. 3 figures in ragged local garb darted between the rocks, their rifles flashing in the sunlight. Taliban. Real ones. About damn time we see someone to shoot at, Martinez yelled, returning fire. His bullets chewed into the rock face where the fighters had been, sending chips of stone flying. Doc dragged Danny behind cover, his hands already tearing at the bloodied fabric of his sleeve. Through and through, he muttered, pressing a bandage to the wound. You're lucky. Danny gritted his teeth, save the pep talk. He leaned out, firing 2 quick shots. One of the fighters crumpled. The other scrambled back, vanishing behind the ridge. Harlow moved to flank, his boots kicking up sand as he sprinted toward a low outcropping. I've got angle on. A burst of gunfire cut him off. Harlow twisted mid-step, his body jerking as rounds struck his vest. He went down hard, rolling behind a boulder just as another volley shredded the air where he'd been standing. Harlow. Danny shouted. No response. Martinez laid down, suppressing fire, his jaw clenched. We gotta fall back, Sarge. They've got us pinned. Danny's vision swam, the edges darkening with blood loss. He could see Harlow's rifle jutting from behind the rock, unmoving. Then movement. A shadow, darker than the others, slithering over the dune behind Harlow's position. Danny's breath caught. Harlow behind you. Harlow turned. His scream cut through the gunfire like a knife. And then, silence. No final shot. No struggle. Just Harlow's voice severed mid-cry, as if something had clamped a hand over his mouth and yanked. The Taliban fire stopped abruptly. The desert stilled. Go, Danny rasped, shoving Martinez toward the outpost. Now. They ran. Doc half carried Danny, his grip iron tight. Martinez covered their retreat, his rifle barking sporadic bursts at nothing because there was nothing. No fighters, no bodies. Just the empty dunes and the fading echo of Harlow's scream. The outpost gate loomed ahead. Torres yanked it open, his face pale. Where's Harlow? Danny didn't answer. Behind them, the desert exhaled a slow, whispering sigh that carried Harlow's name on the wind. And then, nothing. The evacuation chopper's rotor blades thundered overhead, drowning out the last of Danny's ragged breaths. Blood seeped through Doc's hasty bandage, staining the shoulder of his fatigues a dark, sticky red. Martinez sat opposite them, his fingers twitching against his rifle like he still expected a fight. Torres was silent, his gaze fixed on the desert shrinking below them on the spot where Harlow had vanished. No body. No trace. Just the wind and the sand swallowing everything. The debrief room at Bagram was sterile, white walls, fluorescent lights, a folding table with 3 metal chairs. Danny sat stiffly, his shoulder throbbing beneath the fresh dressing. Across from him, Captain Varma steepled his fingers, his expression unreadable. Let's go over it again, Sergeant Reeves, Varma said. The ambush. Danny kept his voice flat. Taliban fighters. Northeast of the outpost. They had the high ground. And Corporal Harlow. Kia. Took fire during the engagement. We couldn't recover the body. A pause. Varma's pen tapped against his notepad. Your initial report mentioned anomalies. Footprints. Laughter. Martinez, seated beside Danny, shifted. Wind plays tricks out there, sir. Sand does weird shit. Doc's hands rested on the table, perfectly still. Stress. Sleep deprivation. It's been a long deployment. Varma studied them. Danny could almost see the calculations behind his eyes, the weight of 3 decorated Marines versus the cost of a paperwork nightmare. Finally, Varma closed his folder. Dismissed. The letter arrived 2 weeks later, just as Danny was being discharged from the infirmary. Remains unrecovered. That was all it said about Harlow. Danny crumpled the paper in his fist. Outside the barracks window, the Afghan sun blazed down on an empty courtyard. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure standing in the shadows of the perimeter wall, too tall, too still. He blinked. Nothing there. Snow whispered against Doc Ellis's kitchen window, the first storm of winter painting his backyard in unbroken white. He set down his coffee, frowning. Footprints. Fresh ones, leading from the tree line to just beneath his porch light. No tracks leading back. Doc's hand hovered over the drawer where he kept his sidearm. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then a scrape of something against the porch steps. He didn't open the door. Rick Torres drowned the whispers in bourbon. They came at night, slithering through the gaps in his apartment walls. Harlow's voice sometimes. Other times, just syllables, hisses of sand against glass. The liquor store clerk raised an eyebrow at his fifth purchase that week. Torres didn't care. The burn in his throat was the only thing that drowned out the sound of something licking its lips just outside his window. Danny burned his uniform in the backyard pit. The fabric blackened and curled, the embers spinning upward into the dark. The scar on his shoulder ached, a cold throb that no painkiller could touch. Behind him, a twig snapped. He didn't turn around. The desert had followed them home, and it was hungry. Doc Ellis exhaled, watching his breath fog the kitchen window. The footprints hadn't moved. They remained there, stark against the snow, a perfect set leading right to his doorstep, as if someone had materialized mid-stride. No return trail, no disturbance in the powder beyond the tree line. His fingers closed around the grip of his Glock in the drawer. The cold metal grounded him. You're not in the desert anymore. But the dread was the same. A soft thud against the porch. Doc's pulse spiked. He thumbed the safety off. Another thud. Closer. Then a whisper. Not through the door. Not through the walls. Inside his head. You left me out there, Doc. Harlow's voice. Slurred, wet like his mouth was full of sand. Doc's grip on the gun trembled. He'd replayed Harlow's scream 1,000 times in the infirmary, the meds doing little to dull the memory. Now it was here, in his fucking kitchen. The porch light flickered. The footprints glistened suddenly, the snow melting in narrow, elongated patches as if something with too many toes had shifted its weight. Doc fired 3 rounds through the door. Wood splintered. The reports echoed through the silent house. Silence followed. When he wrenched the door open, pistol raised, there was nothing. No blood. No disturbance. Just his bullet holes in the railing and the footprints, now slightly larger, the edges blurred like they were still settling. A gust of wind carried snow across the porch. And with it, laughter. Doc slammed the door, deadbolted it, and didn't sleep for 2 days. Torres's apartment stank of sweat and whiskey. Empty bottles littered the floor, their labels peeling in the humidity of his exhales. He'd stopped answering his phone. Stopped shaving. The whispers didn't care about grooming. Rick. He drained another glass, the burn searing his throat. The voice came from the bathroom this time, muffled by the door. You ran first. Torres hurled the glass. It shattered against the tiles. Fuck you, his shout cracked. You were already gone. Silence. Then a wet, dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the linoleum. Torres fumbled for his pistol, knocking over a bottle. Amber liquid seeped into the carpet. The dragging stopped just outside the bathroom door. The knob turned. Slowly. Torres emptied the magazine into the door. Plaster rained from the walls. His ears rang. When he pried it open, shaking, there was nothing. Just bullet holes and the faintest smell of gunpowder, and beneath it, the dry, acrid scent of desert wind. He moved out the next morning. The landlord would later complain about the sand in the tub. Danny knelt by the fire pit, feeding another photograph to the flames. Harlow's grin blackened and curled. Command had sent the personal effects months ago, a neat box of dog tags and letters, and the single photo of the squad, all of them whole, unsuspecting. The wind shifted. Embers spiraled upward. Behind him, the snow crunched. Not the usual settling of ice. A step. Danny didn't turn. "I know you're there." The cold intensified, seeping through his jacket. His breath fogged thickly. "Do you?" The voice wasn't Harlow's. It was layered a chorus of whispers, some human, some not. Danny's fingers twitched toward the kabar at his belt. "Show yourself." A chuckle. The fire dimmed, as if something had breathed in all the oxygen. "We already did." Danny turned. The yard was empty. But the snow. The snow bore footprints, dozens, hundreds, overlapping trails circling the fire pit, pressed deep as if their makers had paced for hours, all elongated, all toeless. And they led right up to where he stood. His scar burned. The fire went out. Doc's phone buzzed at 3:17 a.m. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Then he heard the static, and beneath it, Danny's voice strained. "They're not ghosts." A pause. Wind howled across the line. "They're hunters, and we led them home." Click. Doc stared at the screen. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, unseasonably warm for December. When he looked closer, he realized it wasn't water dripping from the trees. It was sand. The diner was empty except for them. Danny, Doc, and Torres hunched over a corner booth, coffee gone cold in their mugs. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering occasionally as if the power couldn't decide whether to hold. Outside, the parking lot was a black expanse, the streetlight swallowed by an unnatural fog. Doc rubbed his temples. "So what, we're just supposed to burn sage and hope for the best?" Danny turned his mug slowly, watching the dregs swirl. "Harlow said smoke drives them away. The locals believed it." Torres barked a laugh. "Yeah, and the locals also believed in goat sacrifices. Doesn't mean we." A glass shattered in the kitchen. All three froze. The diner had been dead silent when they arrived. The closed sign flipped. No staff. No cook. Just the door unlocked, as if waiting for them. Danny's hand drifted to his hip, where the kabar rested beneath his jacket. "We're not alone." A wet, clicking sound echoed from the kitchen hallway like knuckles popping, if each crack was spaced just a second too far apart. Doc stood abruptly, chair scraping. "We need to go. Now." They moved toward the exit in unison, shoulders brushing. The fog outside thickened as they approached the door, tendrils curling against the glass like probing fingers. Torres reached for the handle. The lights went out. Darkness swallowed the diner. The clicking stopped. Then, from directly behind them, a whisper. "You can't outrun the desert." Danny spun, knife flashing. Metal met something solid, too solid, and stuck fast. A gasp, wet and ragged, too close to his ear. Doc's lighter flared. The flame illuminated Harlow's face, or what was left of it. His skin was sunken, stretched tight over bone, lips peeled back in a rictus grin. Sand trickled from his nostrils, his ears, the hollows of his eyes. His fingers too long, joints too many clamped around Danny's wrist. "We're all part of it now," Harlow rasped. Doc threw the lighter. Fire engulfed the booth in a whoosh, the sage bundle in his other hand igniting like a torch. The thing wearing Harlow's face shrieked, a sound like dunes collapsing, and recoiled into the shadows. The three of them burst into the parking lot, sprinting for Danny's truck. The fog writhed around them, alive, grasping. Torres made it 2 steps before it yanked him off his feet. He didn't scream. The sand filled his mouth first, pouring in, pumping in, as the fog folded over him like a burial shroud. His body convulsed once, then stilled, eyes wide and unblinking as granules trickled from their corners. Danny hauled Doc into the truck and gunned the engine. The tires screamed against the asphalt as they fishtailed onto the road. In the rearview mirror, the fog receded, but not before Danny saw them, figures, dozens now, standing motionless where Torres had fallen. Their outlines wavered like heat haze. And they were smiling. The safe house was an old hunting cabin, half-rotted but sturdy enough. Danny barred the door while Doc lit every candle they'd scavenged, the sage smoke curling thick in the air. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. No, not wind. Breathing. Doc's hands shook as he uncapped a gas can. We should have burned the outpost when we had the chance. Danny didn't answer. He was staring at his reflection in the grimy window, except it wasn't his. The eyes were black pits. The mouth moved without sound. The glass cracked. Doc doused the walls, the floor, the door. When I say so. The first impact shook the cabin. The door bowed inward, nails screeching. Danny struck a match. Now. Ow. The explosion blew the windows out. Fire roared across the ceiling, devouring the sage-smeared walls. The thing in the window shrieked, its image warping as the glass melted. Outside, the howling reached a fever pitch, not pain, but rage. The door burst open. Flames licked at the silhouette framed there, a thing of shifting sand and too many limbs, its face a rotating carousel of every man they'd lost. Harlow, Taurus, Rook. Danny raised his knife. Doc grabbed his arm. Run. They dove through the burning window as the roof collapsed. The last thing Danny saw before the smoke swallowed everything was the creature not fleeing the flames, but wading through them, its body reforming grain by grain. The desert wasn't done with them yet. The highway stretched empty before them, flanked by dead cornfields. Danny drove with one hand on the wheel, the other pressed to the bleeding gash in his side. Doc slumped in the passenger seat, his breath shallow. No pursuit. No fog. Just the open road. Doc coughed, a wet sound. Where now? Danny watched the horizon. Somewhere the sun was rising. Somewhere people were waking up to normal lives. He adjusted the rearview mirror. The back seat was full of sand. West, he said. And the truck rolled on. The storm rolled in from the desert with unnatural speed, swallowing the horizon in a swirling wall of dust and darkness. Danny white-knuckled the steering wheel as the first gusts rocked the truck, sand hissing like static against the windshield. In the passenger seat, Doc braced himself against the dashboard, his face illuminated by the eerie green glow of the GPS. We're not going to outrun Trunnet, Doc muttered, watching the storm's shadow overtake the last patches of blue sky. Danny didn't answer. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again. The sand in the back seat hadn't moved, not a single grain disturbed by the trucks bouncing over the rough terrain, but it had spread, creeping across the upholstery in thin, vein-like trails. A road sign materialized in the gloom ahead, bent and pockmarked by wind-blown grit, Nowhere County Line, PO P47. Take the turnoff, Doc said suddenly. Danny's grip tightened. That's not on the route. Neither is surviving the next 5 minutes if that storm hits us at speed. The tires skidded as Danny wrenched the wheel. The truck fishtailed onto the narrow access road, its headlights cutting through the thickening dust. The storm howled at their backs, close enough now that Danny could feel it, a dry, insistent pressure against his neck, like fingers combing through his hair. The town emerged from the haze like a mirage, a single gas station, its flickering neon sign casting a pallid glow over a cluster of weathered buildings. No cars. No movement. Just the wind whipping through empty streets. Danny pulled up to the gas pumps, killing the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. Doc reached for the door handle, then froze. The storm had stopped at the town limits. Not dissipated. Stopped. The wall of sand and dust hung motionless 50 yards beyond the last building, a towering, undulating cliff face in midair, as if some invisible barrier held it back. Danny exhaled slowly. This isn't right. A metallic clang made them both jump. The gas station service bell had rung on its own, the sound echoing unnaturally in the stagnant air. Then, from the shadows beneath the station's awning, a voice. You boys look like you've seen a ghost. The old man who stepped into the light was leathery and thin, his eyes nearly lost in a web of deep wrinkles. He wore a faded mechanic's jumpsuit, the name Earl stitched over the breast pocket in fraying thread. Doc's hand drifted toward his concealed pistol. "You live here?" Earl spat a stream of tobacco into the dust. Lived. Died. Somewhere in between. His gaze lingered on the truck's back seat, where the sand gleamed dully in the dim light, same as whatever's following you. Danny's scar throbbed. "You know what it is." A dry chuckle. "No? Son, I fed it. Same as my pappy did and is before him." Earl limped past them, trailing fingers along the truck's hood. "This town's been a toll road for things like that since the railroad left. You pass through, you leave something behind." His yellowed teeth showed in something that wasn't a smile. "Problem is, you boys didn't stop when you should have." Doc's voice was tight. "How do we kill it?" Earl turned, his shadow stretching too long in the neon glow. "Ain't about killing. It's about balance." He nodded toward the storm. "That's your shadow. You're dead. And it's gonna collect." The service bell rang again. This time, the entire town echoed at every window, every piece of loose metal singing the same single, clear note. Danny turned just as the first tendril of sand slipped from the truck's window, pooling on the ground in a perfect, elongated footprint. Earl sighed. Too late for running now. And with a sound like 1,000 sighs, the hovering storm leaned forward and began to spill over the town's edge. The sand poured into town like water breaching a dam, cascading over rooftops and filling the streets in eerie silence. Danny backed away from the truck, his boots crunching on the first thin layer of grit already coating the pavement. Earl grabbed his arm with surprising strength. Inside, now. They barely made it to the gas station before the first wave hit. The windows rattled under the onslaught, the glass frosting over with a million tiny impacts. Danny pressed his back against the snack aisle, his pulse hammering in his throat. The station's fluorescent lights flickered, casting stuttering shadows across shelves of decade-old candy and bleached-out magazines. Doc wiped blood from his split lip. "You said this town was a toll road. What the hell does that mean?" Earl rummaged behind the counter, producing a rusted coffee can. When he pried off the lid, the stench of old meat and copper wafted out. Inside lay a collection of teeth, bullet casings, and a single dog tag. Means some things get through if they get fed. He tossed the tag to Danny. It was pitted with age, the name R. Torres barely legible. Danny's stomach lurched. "This is fresh." "To you, maybe." Earl's grin showed gaps where teeth should have been. Time don't work the same for the hungry. Outside, the sand shifted. Not with the wind, with purpose. It piled against the door in rhythmic waves, as if something beneath the grains was testing the structure. Doc's pistol gleamed as he checked the magazine. So we feed it something else. Earl barked a laugh. "Ain't you been listening?" It already picked its meal. He pointed at Danny's scar. "Marked you. The rest of us, we're just garnish." The front window shattered. Sand fountained inward, hitting the linoleum with a sound like falling rice. It didn't spread. It coiled, piling into a mound that quivered like a living thing. Danny's knife was in his hand before the first tendril lashed out a whip of grit that wrapped around Earl's ankle with a crack of breaking bone. The old man howled as he was yanked off his feet, his body skidding toward the door. Doc fired. The bullet passed clean through the sand tendril with no effect. Earl's fingers scrabbled at the doorframe. "The well," he screamed. "Send it back to the goddamn." The rest was cut off as he vanished into the storm, his body disintegrating into the swirling grains like sugar and tea. Danny and Doc ran for the back exit. The sand pursued in rivulets, flowing up walls and across ceilings with impossible speed. A storage room door burst open ahead of them, revealing a yawning darkness, and from it, a figure stepped forward. Taurus. Or what was left of him. His skin was parchment dry, stretched taut over bones that bent in too many places. Sand trickled from his nostrils as he spoke. "Should have stayed in the truck." Doc didn't hesitate. He put 3 rounds between Tor's eyes. The body collapsed, but the sand kept coming. It poured from Tor's mouth, his eye sockets, the bullet holes themselves, reforming into something taller, something with too many joints. Danny grabbed Doc's arm and bolted for the rear lot. Earl's last words echoed in his skull, the well. Behind the station, a rusted metal cover lay half buried in the dirt. Danny pried it up with his knife, revealing a black shaft that exhaled air colder than the desert night. Doc peered down. You can't be serious. The station's wall exploded outward. The sandstorm condensed into a single, towering figure. Harlow's face stretched across its surface like a mask, mouth unhinging to swallow the sky. Danny didn't think. He shoved Doc aside as the thing lunged and let himself fall backward into the well. The last thing he saw was Doc's outstretched hand. Then the darkness took him. Cold. That was Danny's first thought. Not the dry chill of desert nights, but the damp, marrow-deep cold of something underground. His boots hit water with a splash, the impact driving the air from his lungs. He surfaced gasping, the blackness absolute. Something brushed his leg. He thrashed backward, knife raised, but there was nothing to stab, just the stagnant water and the echoing drip of moisture from unseen walls. Then, light. A pale blue glow seeping through cracks in the well's curved stone. It illuminated the chamber in jagged fragments. He wasn't alone. Bodies floated just beneath the surface, dozens of them, perfectly preserved. Some wore Civil War uniforms, others flannel and denim. A few had modern fatigues, all had the same sand-packed eye sockets. And at the chamber's center, rising from the water like a grotesque fountain, stood a figure of packed earth and bone. Its arms ended in too many fingers. Its face was a hollow where the light bent wrong. It spoke without moving. You brought it back. Danny's knife hand shook. Brought what? The thing gestured. The water rippled, revealing the well's walls not stone, but teeth, each one the size of a head, fused together in a grinning maw. The hunger. Above, the well shaft trembled. Sand rained down in streams, hissing as it hit the water. The blue light intensified, throwing monstrous shadows across the chamber. Danny understood then. The well wasn't a well. It was a throat. And whatever waited at the bottom had just swallowed. The sand hit the water in a roaring cascade, the chamber filling faster than Danny could process. He grabbed a protruding tooth handhold as the current surged, his boots slipping on slick bone. The central figure didn't move, just watched with its awful, absent face as the flood rose. Something grabbed Danny's ankle. One of the floating corpses had latched onto him, its sand-filled eyes leaking grit like tears. Its mouth moved in sync with the central figure's voice. Only one way out. Danny kicked free, scrambling higher. The water churned below, alive with grasping hands. The blue light pulsed, illuminating etchings carved between the teeth-crude stick figures fleeing a towering storm. A pattern emerged. In every carving, one figure stood apart, arms raised, facing the storm. Sacrifice. Danny's breath came in ragged gasps. The sand water reached his waist, its touch leaching warmth from his core. The central figure tilted its head, expectant. A shadow blotted out the well's opening above. Doc leaned over the edge, his silhouette backlit by moonlight. Danny. The central figure's voice slithered through Danny's skull. Him or you? Danny looked at the carvings, at the floating dead, at the thing waiting patiently for its due. He made his choice. With a final heave, he pulled himself up, not toward Doc, but past him onto the rim of the well. The sandstorm recoiled as he emerged, its grains skittering away like roaches from light. Doc stared. What the hell is down there? Danny didn't answer. He grabbed the metal cover and slammed it shut over the well. The resulting clang shook the ground. The sandstorm stilled. Then, with a sound like a sigh, it collapsed inward, every grain pouring into the well's vents until nothing remained but moonlight and silence. Doc exhaled. Is it gone? Danny studied his hands. They were clean. No sand. No blood. No, he met Doc's gaze. Just waiting. In the distance, a coyote howled. Somewhere beneath them, something howled back. The road stretched west. They started walking. The diner sign buzzed in the Nevada dawn, its neon barely visible against the harsh sunlight. Danny sat at the counter, stirring cooling coffee. Doc slumped beside him, his fingers tracing the fresh scar on his palm, a gift from the well's edge. The waitress refilled their mugs without asking. "Storm's coming," she said, nodding toward the horizon. Danny followed her gaze. The sky was clear. Then he looked down. A single grain of sand sat at the bottom of his cup. It dissolved when he touched it. Doc's hand twitched toward his pistol. Danny shook his head. They'd learned the rules now. Some debts couldn't be outrun, only postponed. He left a 20 on the counter and an old dog tag beneath it. The desert always collected what it was owed. The truck engine roared to life. Somewhere, a well chuckled. The truck's engine sputtered as they crossed the Nevada state line, the heat rippling off the asphalt in visible waves. Danny kept one hand on the wheel and the other pressed against his scar, the old wound pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Beside him, Doc stared at the horizon, his knuckles white around the grip of his pistol. "You feel that?" Doc muttered. Danny didn't need to ask what he meant. The air had thickened, carrying the metallic tang of ozone and something older, something that smelled like dry riverbeds and sun-bleached bones. Ahead, the road shimmered, not from heat, from movement. Danny slammed the brakes. The truck skidded to a halt just shy of the disturbance. The asphalt ahead rippled, grains of sand seeping up through cracks in the pavement like blood from a wound. They gathered, coalescing into a shape, a figure, hunched and elongated, its features indistinct but undeniably focused on them. Doc's window exploded inward. Glass rained across the cab as a whip of sand lashed through, wrapping around Doc's throat. He gagged, clawing at the gritty noose, his boots kicking against the dashboard. Danny grabbed his knife and slashed at the tendril. The blade passed through without resistance. The figure on the road took a step forward. Its outline solidified, Harlow's face stretched over something grotesquely wrong, his jaw unhinging to reveal a gullet of swirling darkness. "Should have stayed in the well," it whispered with Harlow's voice. Danny did the only thing left. He floored the accelerator straight toward it. The truck's grill plowed into the figure with a sound like 1,000 insects screaming. The sand body disintegrated, but not before a final tendril snapped out, carving a jagged line across Danny's cheek before vanishing into the wind. Doc collapsed forward, coughing up grit. "It's playing with us," he rasped. Danny wiped blood from his face. The scar on his shoulder burned hotter. The storm was coming, and this time they wouldn't outrun it. The last gas station. The sign flickered, "Last chance fuel BAT," its neon buzzing like a dying insect. Danny pulled into the dust-choked lot, the truck's headlights illuminating a single pump and a boarded-up diner. The place looked abandoned, but the door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and old grease. A shotgun lay across the counter, its barrel gleaming in the dim light. Behind it, a woman in her 60s eyed them with the calm of someone who'd seen worse. "You're bleeding," she observed. Danny touched his cheek. The cut had stopped bleeding, but the edges were dark, not with blood, but with fine black grains. "We need supplies." The woman, Marmee, according to her name tag, snorted. "What you need is an exorcism." She reached under the counter and produced a mason jar filled with murky liquid. "Drink." Doc recoiled. "The hell is that?" "Water from the Carson sink. Only thing that slows it down." She pushed the jar toward Danny. "You're marked. It'll follow you until you feed it or drown it." Danny unscrewed the lid. The water smelled like rust and rotten eggs. He drank. The effect was immediate. His vision blurred, the room tilting on its axis. For a terrifying second, he saw the desert stretching endlessly in every direction, a living thing breathing beneath the sand, and in its heart, a darkness older than the stones. Then Marnie slapped him. "Stay with me, soldier," she snapped. "You look too long. It'll take you." Doc grabbed Danny's arm. "What the fuck did you just give him?" Clarity. Marnie slid the shotgun across the counter. "You got two choices. You can run," she nodded toward the door. "Or you can do what the old tribes did. Trap it where it sleeps." Danny's voice was rough. "Where?" Marnie smiled. It wasn't comforting. Same place all bad things go when they die. Outside, the wind picked up. The first grains of sand hissed against the windows. Doc exhaled. Hell. Marnie racked the shotgun. Close. The salt flats. The truck's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the cracked expanse of the dried-up lake bed. The salt crust glittered like frost under the moon, stretching endlessly in every direction. Danny killed the engine, the silence pressing him like a weight. Doc checked the shotgun. How's this supposed to trap it? Danny stepped onto the salt. It crunched underfoot, the sound unnaturally loud. Salt purifies. Marnie said the tribes used it to bind spirits. A gust of wind howled across the flats, carrying the scent of hot sand. Doc stiffened. It's here. The storm crested the horizon, a towering wall of dust and darkness, moving against the wind. Within its depths, shapes writhed, elongated figures with too many limbs, their outlines shifting like dunes in a quake. Danny raised the mason jar. The remaining water sloshed, black now with suspended grit. When I give the signal, the storm hit. Sand blasted them like buckshot, stinging exposed skin and filling Danny's mouth with the taste of blood and decay. He spat, blinking against the grit, and saw at the central figure, Harlow's face stretched over a body of whirling darkness, its arms outstretched. You don't belong here, it whispered with 100 voices. Danny hurled the jar. It shattered at the figure's feet. The black water seeped into the salt, spreading in inky tendrils. The figure shrieked, its form unraveling at the edges. Doc fired. The salt exploded where the buckshot hit, the granules igniting in flashes of blue-white light. The storm recoiled, its edges fraying. Danny lunged forward with his knife, plunging it into the figure's chest. The blade sank deep, not into flesh, but into something older. The desert screamed. The ground beneath them trembled, the salt crust cracking open in jagged fissures. From the depths rose a stench of rot and ancient water, the air vibrating with a sound like 1,000 rattlesnakes. The figure grabbed Danny's wrist, its fingers elongating into sand spines. You'll drown with me, it hissed. Danny twisted the knife. Yeah, but you'll die first. The salt ignited. A chain reaction of blue fire raced across the lake bed, the flames devouring the sandstorm from within. The figures writhed, their bodies dissolving into ash. The central figure's face melted, Harlow's features slaving away to reveal the yawning void beneath. Then, silence. The storm was gone. The salt flats stretched undisturbed under the moon. Doc coughed, kneeling beside Danny. Did we? A single grain of sand fell from Danny's sleeve onto the salt. It sizzled, then vanished. Danny exhaled, for now. The road stretched west. They started walking. The waitress at the Arizona truck stop didn't ask questions when Danny paid in cash. She just slid 2 coffees across the counter and nodded toward the horizon. Big one coming. Danny followed her gaze. The sky was clear, but the scar on his shoulder ached. Doc stirred his coffee. The liquid swirled black, then, for a second, gritty. They drank in silence. Outside, the wind picked up. Some debts couldn't be outrun, only postponed.